Hi, I'm Reverend Jake Zabe, and welcome to Children's Bible Stories. Hello children, our Bible story for today is going to be the story of St. Paul's shipwreck. So St. Paul had been arrested and imprisoned, and he wanted to plead his case before Caesar, and so he was heading off to Rome. And so they had him on a big prison ship. And on the ship he had two of his friends, St. Luke and Aristarchus. Two of Paul's companions went with him on the ship. So they were sailing the ship and they came to the island of Cyprus. And they sailed under Cyprus because the winds were blowing against them. And when they had sailed over the sea, which was off of Cilicia and Pamphylia, they came to the city of Myra. And so there at Myra, they came across an Alexandrian ship that's from the city of Alexandria in Egypt, and it was headed to Italy. That's to Rome. And so they moved all the prisoners onto that ship. And so Paul and them set off on this new Alexandrian ship, and they went under the island of Crete. So that when it means under, they went south, under the island of Crete. They were using that to protect them from the wind because it was very bad weather at that time. And they came to a place called Fairhaven, and that's where they were just stationed at the moment. Now, sailing at that time was very difficult because the weather wasn't very good. And so St. Paul came and said to the soldiers, "Men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." Nevertheless, the centurion was persuaded more by the helmsman. So that means the guy driving the ship. He said it was going to be okay to sail, and the centurion listened to him, and he ignored St. Paul's warning. And because of that, they set sail with the hope that they could reach Phoenix, a harbour on Crete, and they could go from there. And when they set sail, a big storm came and pushed them out into sea. And the big storm was wild and chaotic, blown around, and everybody was scared and terrified of this big storm. Yeah, even the mask fell off. And so the big storm was blowing them around. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their hands. And there was neither sun nor stars appearing for many days because the storm was so bad upon them. But after a long fasting from food, St. Paul stood up in the midst of them, and he said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not set sail from Crete and incurred this disaster and loss." See, so they should have listened to St. Paul. Paul said we shouldn't go sailing because where they were at Fairhavens was safe. But the helmsmen and the soldiers said, no, let us sail to Phoenix, which was a different city on the island of Crete. And because of that, God sent a big storm and punished them and sent them out into the middle of the ocean. The people went quite a way away from Crete. They wanted to go from the eastern side of Crete around to the western side of Crete. Instead, the storm pushed them right out into the Mediterranean Sea, far away from the island of Crete. And so Paul had told them they should have listened to him. Paul is telling the soldiers to listen to him because while he was on the ship, an angel from God came and spoke to him. And the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Paul, for you must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God will grant you all those who sail with you." And so the angel had promised Paul that not only would he go to Caesar, but because Paul was so faithful to God, that God was going to protect the lives of everyone else on the ship. And so Paul told the soldiers to take heart, for he believed God and that God would protect them. He said, "However, we must run ashore on a certain island." And now this was the 14th night had come, as they were driven down to the Adriatic Sea, and about midnight the sailors sensed that they were coming near some land. They're getting close. There's some land coming up. And when they took the surroundings and found it to be 20 fathoms, then they had gone a little further, they took surroundings again and found that it was 15 fathoms. They were fearing that they were going to run aground on the rocks, and so they dropped their anchors and prayed for day to come. So the sailors on the ship It's those who weren't the soldiers, but those who were in charge of the ship. They tried to sneak away, so they were going to put the skiff, that's the little boat, down so that they could sail away and get away from the ship and just leave the soldiers and the prisoners. But Paul said to the centurions and the soldiers, unless these men stay with the ship, we cannot be saved, because God promised that everyone on the ship was going to be saved. So if these men ran away, God wasn't going to save the rest of the ship. So the soldiers cut the skiff away and let the boat just fall away. So their little boat sailed away. And as day was about to dawn, Paul employed them to take food, saying, today is the 14th day you have waited and continued without food and eaten nothing. Therefore I urge you to take nourishment, for this is the day of your survival, since not a hair will fall from the head of any of you. And when he had said these things, he took some bread, and he gave thanks to God in the presence of all them, and he broke it, and they began to eat. And he encouraged them, and they took food for themselves. And all the people on the ship numbered 276 people. And so they ate the food, and then they lightened the ship by throwing the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they observed a bay with a beach, onto which they planned to run the ship if possible. And so they let go of the anchors and let them fall into the sea. Meanwhile they loosed the rudder ropes and they hoisted the mainsail in the wind, and they made ready for the shore. So they started sailing towards the beach. And as they sailed, they struck into some rocks. And they crashed there. And they were stuck there, and the ship began to be broken up by the waves. That's when the soldiers had the plan to kill the prisoners. But Paul persuaded them not to, saying that everyone had to be left alive and that God would save all of them. So instead, the soldiers commanded that anyone who could swim should dive overboard and swim for land. And anybody who couldn't swim should grab hold of a big plank of wood and sail towards the beach. And so they did, swimming or sailing on some pieces of wood. They all ended up on the beach. All 276 persons, just as God had promised St. Paul. And when they finally escaped the water, they found out that the island they were on was the island of Malta, which is not far from the Italian peninsula. So that shows how far the storm had pushed the ship. When they were originally there at Fair Havens, they were on the eastern side of the island of Crete, and they were just going to sail around to the western side of the island of Crete. Instead, they got sailed all the way to the island of Malta, which was very, very far away. And God had kept all the people safe, just as he had promised St. Paul. And so that's our story for today, children. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye, and God bless.